We are about to start our first conversation for this morning, where there's a lot of information that we want to learn about what our laws say about sexual harassment. We have with us on set attorney Audrey Matura. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming in, because this is an educational topic for all of us. I think not many people have paid attention to the fact that we do have laws about sexual harassment. You shared with us just now that it has never been used.
Yes. Well, we do have an exact name, Protection Against Sexual Harassment Act.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, I have found no record or don't know of any case where this legislation has been used to protect the right of any person, male or female, because sexual harassment can go both ways.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to think it's mostly female, but males are sexually harassed as well.
Mm-hmm.
Although the majority is always the female,
Yeah.
to be realistic. So we have it, like I said earlier, paper tiger.
Mm-hmm.
And what's amazing is that at least in Belize we have this.
Yes.
About 3 to 4 years ago, I was invited to go have a discussion through CARICOM states to discuss sexual harassment,
Mm-hmm.
and not one of those jurisdictions had anything, nothing dealing with sexual harassment. So they were applauding Belize, and they said, you are forward thinking and whatever. I said, yes, but it's only on paper.
Yeah.
And I said, it's best not to have anything than to have something that is ineffective. And sadly, I believe this legislation is ineffective. It doesn't bring the kind of redress I think you deserve.
Yeah.
And I think the process in itself could be so humiliating and discouraging, and that would account why we can't find cases where it has been done.
Yeah.
And let me explain why I say that. In it, you know, if you go to court,
Mm-hmm.
you make a claim against a person, that person has to show up and answer. You put your evidence, they put their evidence, and there will be a hearing, and then there'll be a conclusion. This is different.
Yeah.
You're basically applying to the court to do an inquiry. So you're not taking the person to court and sure that there has to be like a trial or whatever. You're telling the court, oh, please,
Check into this.
check into this. And then there is an in-camera or behind-the-scene process that can take place. But at the start, without proceeding further, the magistrate, because it's a magistrate court matter, can determine that waste of time, that it won't go anywhere. So I'm worried about that aspect, and even what the relief could be. It doesn't really send a strong message.
Yeah.
It's not like and then there are different degrees of sexual harassment. And this is not even a criminal matter. The way they put it is, it's like a civil inquiry, and the final decision, and there are different decisions which I'll go in a while, the details, what can happen or not. The final decision rests with a magistrate. And it's not to put down our magistrates, it's that I believe that the nature of the offenses should require the matter being heard at the Supreme Court, which is a different process and a whole different level at which the court operates.
Different level of training as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so it's a magistrate court matter, unfortunately. And
So when
it
you say
seems
it's
so
not
trivial.
criminal, what would be the offenses?
Oh, the offenses to me seem so. Let me read them so that I don't misquote. And what I want to say too is, while the act of sexual harassment is not criminal, ironically, other things that can happen is criminal. For example, you have the inquiry and the person didn't produce a document, then that becomes criminal. But you have to take them to summary conviction to be able to say, okay, you committed a criminal offense because you did not produce the document. But you did not commit a criminal offense when you put the little person on their butt, or you said something sexual, or you braced them against the wall. Oh, that's not criminal. And then what we could look at is how, not using this, you can still get redress under the other legislation, since I think this is so weak. But let me, offenses and penalties.
Yeah,
Listen, so any person appearing before the court as witness, as an inquirer, no. I want the what can happen, the decisions of the court here. It's section 16, determination by the court. They can dismiss the complaint or find in favor of the complainant and make one of or more of the following. And the following are, they can make a pronouncement and order that the respondent has engaged in conduct amounting to sexual harassment and should not repeat or continue it. Like, spank your
So
partner.
just don't do that
Don't be
again.
a bad boy or a bad girl again.
Yeah.
Don't do that again.
Yep.
That's one. B, that the respondent should perform any reasonable act or course of conduct to redress any loss or damage suffered by the complainant. So that's a little bit stronger, because it may be that you didn't get a promotion,
Yeah.
and as a result, of course, you lost wages or whatever, you may have left the workplace. So that's one of the better ones, I would say, because at least you could get something out of it.
But it's still pretty open-ended.
Yeah, it's very open-ended. It doesn't say, and what it says, it isn't even mandatory, listen, that the respondent should perform any reasonable act or course. So this is, the court may make this order. It doesn't say that once they found that you have committed
make a
an act of, that you must, this is one of them you must do. It's you may. So it's left up to the discretion of someone else. Then the other one is that an order be made to bind you over, not to repeat this for a period of time. Like that's just so. It says that an order be made to bind over the respondent for a period of time, and any repetition of the conduct during his binding over shall constitute contempt of court. Not even criminal contempt of court. It's a contempt of court. Like because maybe we're in the legal profession, we understand the difference and severity of it.
And I was going to say,
it's so minor.
You got to break that down for us. Is it just saying stop for a while? Is that what it's saying?
It's saying stop for a while.
And no definitive time.
No, stop for a while. So they could tell you for 1 week, I want you to be a good boy, no? Exactly. For 1 week, you be a good girl, right? And then they're saying if during that time you say something or do something that could amount to sexual harassment, which, by the way, you'd have to go through the entire process again to prove that this act that you did during the binding over was sexual harassment, then, and only then, they will say, okay, we'll treat it as a contempt of court. It's like when we get protection orders are criminal matters.
Yes.
And if you violate it, it's a criminal offense, and you have imprisonment and stuff like that. Oh, the penalties are very minor, but let me finish tell you so that people know what the court could end up saying, that the respondent desists in continuing the act in question. Just like the first one, just stop it. When they tell you stop it, you know. E, that the respondent should pay to the complainant damages by way of compensation for any loss or damage suffered by reason of the conduct of the respondent. You have to prove that you lost. You have to prove damages. They don't even make provision for emotional damages, because sometimes
it is emotional.
You may have had to go to a therapist.
Yeah.
You don't know what the person, it may have affected your relationship with your partner or with your family members, with your co-workers. They're not looking at your loss at that level. They're saying, okay, you have to prove that during that time when you rip your skirt, and so the skirt may cost what, $20? I'm going to give you $20 for the skirt for a rip, you know. Things like that. And I'm not trivializing. I'm telling you that's what it really means. It's like the compensation for what you actually go through if you've been sexually harassed. I mean, you won't quantify it in terms of that you could prove you lost your salary. You have to prove it's the emotional drainage. It's the emotional loss. It's how it affects your...
It's a violation.
You know? Yeah. And it doesn't make a redress for that. Then it says... where the complaint relates to sexual harassment by a fellow co-worker, then the employer concerned should take appropriate action to ensure that the harassment ceases and to report thereon to the court. And I don't like the word should, shall, make it mandatory. It still sounds like, okay, you should do it,
so it's saying that
you don't
your
really
place of employment should protect you.
Yes. Well, that part is good, but then...
Or remove the threat of the sexual harassment.
Well, it could remove the threat, whatever they have to do, to make sure it doesn't continue. And in this case, the appropriate action to ensure that the harassment ceases, the appropriate action may be they change you to another department, they change
transfer you somewhere else.
Right, but it doesn't mean that necessarily the person won't have an employment. Then the other one is that it would be inappropriate for any further action to be taken in the matter, so they can actually tell you. I don't think it's appropriate for you to bring any similar matter to this again. I don't know how a court could reach that level. How they can determine...
Wait, what does that mean?
How they can determine in this case. So let's say you take a case of sexual harassment. They can tell you, okay, we don't think it's appropriate for you thereafter to bring any further matters before this court.
So stop complaining.
Just stop complaining. That's what the words I hear. That's what Alex, you know how she put it. Stop complaining. Because it said that it would be inappropriate for any further action to be taken in the matter. And the final one, make such order or declaration as may be appropriate in relation to the complaint. So like, we're waiting to hear, shall be in prison for such time, shall do this, or have to do counseling, or mandatory community work, or, you know, go to a anger management thing, or nothing. It's like, okay, you not a little boy or you not a little girl, we just spank you on your hand.
What about things like the sex offender registry? Because we do have
No,
one with the,
no.
the latest amendment with the criminal code, right?
Yes.
So this doesn't align with that. If
Right.
someone is found to have sexually harassed a person, they don't necessarily go on
No,
the offenders list.
not on any offenders list. So subsection 2 is very interesting because it says the court may, in making the determination, which are all those things above, which I said they can do, they may take into consideration injury to the complainant's feelings or humiliation suffered by the complainant, right? So they only say, oh, do you think she may hurt? Okay, let's go find that. We should tell him not continue this anymore. They're not saying they should find how to help you with some form of redress. Just take in mind, you think she may feel bad about it? You think it may affect her emotions and whatever? They're not even saying you can use that as a basis then to determine damages. Nothing of that sort. And determining damages is a way of getting compensation for whatever you've suffered. Right?
And then we know that we know as well that magistrates court is not a court of record, so it's not like that the magistrates would be in a position to say, look at similar cases, look at things and say that, well, this is what I think is fair. It's sort of given such the wide powers. It's like a, giving.
Ad hoc, like, you know,
exactly.
Is this law mirrored from another country, or because
now
that you read it, it's just like.
I can't say. I really can't say. I'm sorry, but I can't say. But I can't think.
I'm just trying to
I can't think about other jurisdiction. So other jurisdiction that would have sexual harassment legislation definitely would be like European countries.
Yes.
Would be like Canada and the USA. And trust me, I can imagine them taking something like this to any Supreme Court. We're seeing what's happening with the Me Too movement, and Jeffrey Epstein, how it would have been more of a criminal nature, some of the things he did. We don't know if anything amounted to sexual harassment on the job, but they took it from a strictly criminal perspective.
Yes.
And we saw what happened to Bill Cosby, and I'm sure there are many more that will come up. There's Weinstein.
Weinstein is on right now.
You know? But you see how they deal with it differently? That's what I wish we would do here, because then usually the people who sexually harass are people in position and power. They have a lot to lose. But what this law does is protect their reputation for them.
And then don't we also factor into that one of the huge issues that we have as well is that not only the law, is that it's also cultural, in that so much that in our situation is that it's accepted culturally to do so much of what is really would amount to harassment, you know.
Okay.
We think about, just walking down the street.
We tolerate a lot. We'll not start me too with that
With
catcalling.
street harassment,
That
is
catcalling.
harassment.
Right. And unfortunately, so you need to understand too, this law doesn't cover sexual harassment in all places. It is very specific. So there may be situations where you feel sexually harassed, but you can't get any form of redress. So the sexual harassment that they look at is in institutions. So in places of employment. And in places of employment, I would have to read this legislation widely, that it means also public and private sector, because it doesn't say specifically. So places of employment. Sexual harassment in institutions, that's mean where there's students or inmates. And sexual harassment in our educational system is very high. I mean, to the point that students are becoming impregnated by their teachers, and it's hushed along the way. Then it also look at the duty for institutions to ensure that there's no sexual harassment. So it's still an institution, and the other provision where it makes is for where you are seeking accommodation somewhere, so your landlord will try to sexually harass you. But everything else for you happen. If it doesn't happen in a school or institution where there are inmates, so you have some control over someone, it's not sexual harassment under this law. And if it doesn't happen in the workplace directly, it's not sexual harassment, and we'll take it for private and public sector, the workplace. And if it doesn't happen when you go and try and rent some accommodation, be it a hotel or a lease for a apartment or house, then it's not sexual harassment. So the catcalling, or when you go to some public place to get service and stuff, it's not sexual harassment. So imagine you go to the post office and the officer there is sexually harassing you, and it doesn't amount to sexual harassment.
Because you're not employed in that place.
Because what they're doing, they've limited sexual harassment to mean that the person has some authority over you. They don't see, and that is limited how they define it, having some authority, like a teacher to a student,
Yeah.
a supervisor
Employer to employee.
yes.
It does make provisions for employee to
Yes,
employee
the
as well.
co-workers, yes, because your co-worker could be your supervisor.
Supervisor. Let me just step back for
Okay.
a bit. Two things I want to get into the conversation. One, it's important for us to apply the context. We are
Yes.
hearing the atrocious stories coming out from the Belize Defence Force of allegations of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, extortion, and many other things. And I think it's
Yes.
important for us to know what the laws allow for. That's one.
Yes.
Secondly, we cannot have this conversation without talking about what the law defines as acts of sexual harassment,
Okay.
because it is a term that we throw about, but the devil is always in the details. So,
Yes.
what is considered sexual harassment in this legislation?
Okay, before we go there, I just want to add one little caveat. You've mentioned the BDF,
Yeah.
but I want you to know that for a long time, it's not only the BDF, it's the police, it's the Coast Guard. And I've had instances where I have tried to assist women. I've not had any case yet of men, especially in the Coast Guard, that has had serious allegations of sexual harassment. One of my more recent clients, they even found a way to get her out of the service rather than to have an investigation. The trick with that for me was that their rules make provision as to certain things that can be done. I had believed that it was best to use their rules because it was stronger than this. I could imagine in the BDF it's the same. They have certain protocols and policies and legislation that they can use. So it's nothing new. It's new that someone is speaking out. But if women were willing to tell you the truth as to what has happened to some of them, you'd be appalled at some of the stories. And it goes two ways. Some of them have eventually just given up on any prospect of moving ahead and are satisfied or become satisfied with just where they are. And some of them have given into the play for advancement. And I mean, some of us would be judgmental, but when you're in the
But we
reality,
don't work in that context.
when you
yeah.
are in the reality, it may make a difference between feeding your kids or not. And you have to harden yourself and you say, no, go with the punches. So that's what I wanted to do. So sexual harassment right here is anything from the touching and anything physical of a sexual nature, and words said, things are said. So like in Belize, a lot of sexual harassment goes on because in the workplace, I don't know if you realize how sexually impregnated some of those statements people say to you
Yes.
are, so it basically comes down to that.
Yeah.
You can, what I would suggest as a professional, because the law is so light, if someone touches you, and it is sexual harassment, but you don't believe you'll get redress here, which I don't think you'll get redress here, this is a humiliation in itself, you can then use the criminal system, use the criminal code, because there is provision there for different types of sexual assaults. And it may be just a common assault, which is minor, to up to where you could say, look, it's an aggravated assault, because I mean, you've actually had instances where the person says he has pushed me against the wall and he has done X, Y, and Z to me to the extent almost like rape. So, but now with the provisions under the law, you could use that. That's sometimes of an aggravated nature. It happens. But I think the more common one in our culture is the words.
The verbal, yeah.
And then it's your word against my word.
And that was the question I mean, it's been nagging me since we started, because the nature, especially in the verbal issues, a lot of it's cultural. A lot of conversations can be very sexually charged, or there's a lot of innuendo that takes place. Where do you draw the line between what is harassment and what isn't? Because some people are willing participants. Some people are unwilling observers.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
Why I'll say it's dangerous is because you have to put it in context.
Yeah.
I would say where you consent, where we're having a conversation as friends. And I mean, we are all adults here. We've all gotten out of hand with some of our conversation, but we know time and place. But if you're in that conversation and you're not comfortable, you need to say that to them. And you need to leave. You need to do something. Others need to be sensitive.
So I have to say, don't say that to me.
I
don't talk like that to me.
Yes, you have to. Because you have to set your barriers, your boundaries. Why I say it's dangerous is because I know of a acquaintance in the US where she was fired using their sexual harassment legislation because she received a sexually explicit video from her husband, which was kind of funny. I mean, all of us get this on our phone. And she thought this person was her good friend, and she showed the person, and then the person went to tell on her and said that that was sexual harassment because it was in the workplace. It was of a sexual nature and inappropriate for her to show me, and she was fired on that basis. No inquiry or anything. She could have challenged it because their laws is different. So this is another extreme. Like you can't.
You have to know the other person is a willing participant.
Yes, and her friend could have said, "I don't want to see that," you know. And the thing is, if you're in a workplace where you're comfortable with certain people, certain things will happen. So you have to be careful. We don't want to get to the extreme where you don't know if to pay someone a compliment, because in the US they men tell you, I can't even pay a compliment because I'm afraid I'll be charged with sexual harassment. And I remember when I worked with Oceana, they gave us this whole sexual harassment workshop, which was very interesting because their system is different than ours. So some of the things we take for granted that we do in the workplace here, they wouldn't even dare try there because they're all just walking like straight, like, okay, I shouldn't even look at her too strongly. I shouldn't even say, you know, that's an extreme. We don't want to be there. We need to think about and deal with the really true harassment things where it's not just a coworker didn't like you, so as you look at them, you went to tell the boss, he winked at me, and that's sexual harassment. You don't want to reach that extent. But we are not even there yet. We're like the real issues, and we haven't even addressed it.
And I was going to say that because I think, you know, clearly this has an issue where there are blurred lines between what's appropriate and what's not. But I think we shouldn't be naive enough to not recognize that in our very sexually charged, country, we know that it happens on a regular basis. And we know as women that a lot of it makes us uncomfortable. But because it's kind of the status quo, you either don't say anything or you move away, and you never really take action about it. It's just kind of like, well, you know, that's how men are, that's how they talk.
I'm glad you say that because I can speak from my own personal experience now. I mean, I went into the workforce when I was 19. Very innocent, very naive, even though you all can't imagine me at that stage. Innocent and naive in the same sentence with my name. There was a time when it was. And I'll never forget, and I like to tell this story because it's true. I work at the government departments, and I was a press officer, and I remember every time I went to this particular secretary's office, because we were assigned ministries, as I get there, because I had to go once a week to say, okay, what's the latest press release, he'd always get up and close his door. And I sit there just totally want to die. I think about it. I'm 20, 21, so innocent to the world, and I just want to die. And I went to my boss and I said to Mr. Romero then, I said, this is what CAPSEC does to me every time I go, please don't send me back. And he just kept sending me back. And of course I was a feisty little employee, so every time he wanted to punish me, I was sent back. It reached a point that I used to deal with a certain ministry, and the minister, he made sure that every time I had to do a press release, it was after 5. And I had to take a ride with him then back to Belize City. And then one day he turns to me and he says, young lady, do you have a boyfriend? And I said, yes. Are you having sex with your boyfriend already? And I just wanted to die. And what did I do? I stopped commuting and I got to stay at someone's house. I can tell you countless stories as a professional woman, what I've had to deal with in the workplace. And it reaches the point where I just play dumb, stupid, blind fool that I didn't get what you said, and it went right over my head, and I assert myself in a different way, and I move along. So it's not everybody who can do that, but I recognize it.
Can we just say that was clearly an inappropriate question, you know?
Totally.
That is an inappropriate.
I mean, you're a minister of government. You were minister of what then? Foreign Affairs? I could start calling names because I would face them. I would face them when one has died already. One is getting old and feeble. But it happened. It's true. It happened to me many times. And in government service, it was the worst for me.
But what's different now, and I think that's where we have, because I'm sure people are watching and saying, oh, come on, man, that just sounds question and it hurt you. But I know, I'm not saying I believe this, please let me be clear, but I know I've heard a lot of pushback on issues like this. But the question here, I mean, the issue here is that the world is evolving, and we have people of all ages paying attention to what's happening, especially with the Me Too movement.
Yes, yes.
And now, to use the young people term, they're woke.
Yeah.
They know.
Yeah.
We're woke with them too.
They know that's a line that you shouldn't cross, shouldn't have crossed, or won't cross.
Yes, yes.
And so while we have always seen it as culturally acceptable, and maybe people might think we're getting prudish if women
Yes.
suddenly set boundaries, it is where we are. This is the part of or progression that I should say that we are making.
It's a progression we must make. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the story in the BDF, and I've been reading some of the news items regarding it, and I'm thinking, I'm glad someone stepped forward.
Yeah.
But she's speaking right now, not for the people of 2020. She's speaking for women from the inception of the BDF.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our independence. She's finally the voice for women who suffered silently from 1981, didn't get the promotions, were given more duties just because they didn't yield, were made to feel like the rejects because they are being pressured in some form and they're holding out.
Yeah.
Who couldn't take it and walked off the job and just said, just forget all my benefits, just leave it,
Yeah.
let me move on.
Yeah.
She's speaking for decades of women who have suffered and said nothing, and they just try, the women just try and survive. Do you ever wonder how come our women don't reach high ranks in the BDF, in the police, in the Coast Guard? It's because things like this. I mean,
Yeah.
and I've had the opportunity to have an insight,
Yeah.
having had clients now, but they come to me and I'm telling them the last thing I'll do is tell you, let's go through this. I prefer we find some other form.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why this is not good too. This has a statutory limitation of 12 months. If you don't make the complaint within 12 months, forget it.
Yeah.
Which is terrible because people who are sexually harassed, it's a form of sexual abuse. Abused people or people who feel abused, and especially about your sexuality, which is like the worst violation you could do to a person, they seldom speak up immediately. Very few are brave enough based on how they grew up and their personality that they'll speak up immediately,
Yeah.
but very few don't. So that means if after 12 months, when you finally got therapy or you found a way to verbalize it, when you find, you still can't bring a matter under the sexual harassment legislation.
But even using the legislation or taking a case like this forward, it's like martyrdom. Because let's add
Yep.
the additional context
Yep,
here. And I
it
think
is.
the interviewee last night on the BDF issue said it so clearly. The minute you put the allegation forward, everyone turns against you.
Yes,
She
yes.
spoke of running and people talking of her looking for it because
Yeah.
of what she wore, or whether you have a drink in after hours, or you hang out with the possibly the person who assaulted you or harassed
Yeah.
you are suddenly complicit in
Yeah.
this issue.
Yeah.
And it becomes, I think people realize that bringing issues of sexual harassment forward means that you're almost going against the entire internal culture,
Yes.
which means you
And
have to,
even the women go against you.
and you have to
The
suffer
very
the
woman.
additional consequences of not having been harassed or violated in some way, but everybody else watching you and saying, well, you make a big deal about this stuff.
Yes. I recently was being told by a person who went through an experience. She said she was hanging out with some co-workers, which is not unusual. It was a Friday. They were drinking and everything, and the co-worker said, I'll give you a drop. And she said, cool. And they went, and he said, oh, but I need to go in my house and do something. I said, come along. And she said, well, she was a little bit high, but not drunk that to the point. She said, and she went in and says, I regret it, Miss Audrey. He pushed me down. He wanted to have sex with me. I escaped. And she went and she told a friend, and the friend said, let's go to the police. You report it. She said, no. I can't even subject myself to that.
Yeah.
He said, plus, listen to what she says. She says, plus, I was drinking and I was laughing and talking with him, and that may be seen by others as an invitation. So everybody who was drinking there with us at the workplace would say, why is she the one so? And then she really laugh and talk with me, and she accept it, right? She must be know that that's the way we want. And these are the things how we further victimize a person. So she said she didn't go to the police. And eventually she just resigned because she couldn't deal with it, because she felt there would be a repeat. And it was this whole sense of guilt, like, did I bring it upon myself? And people don't understand that when you are in a position where there's sexual violation, it's so normal that the victim begins to blame herself or himself. It's just so normal. I don't know why it happens. Very few people don't do it. And imagine, she gave up her job just to not face it because she felt so guilty. I've known many instances like that where the person says, well, I won't say anything because then what will my boyfriend think, or what will my fiancé think, or my partner, or my husband. And that's one of the leverage the perpetrator usually uses, because you will look embarrassed. Then you have to answer to your partner, and if it's not a supportive partner, they will flip things on you, and you might reach a point where you say, you know what, it's best I never say anything. Just make me accept that they pat me on my butt and just avoid now next time make it see me butt. So as they start coming, it's gonna turn this way instead of that way, right?
Because
you want to protect yourself.
Even if you do decide to go forward, there's no guarantee that you're gonna get anything out of it in any event.
And with this inquiry, you see what they said. It reaches here where it can be dismissed, and the court can actually say, oh, that's just frivolous and vexatious. I could imagine a man comes in the courtroom to say his portion, and the stories he could say that, oh, she's just saying that because she was coming on to me and I told her I wouldn't leave my wife for her, whatever. And suddenly you find yourself being the one accused of things.
Yourself,
right, and then a court decides, oh, well, you just brought that up because it's frivolous and vexatious. You were just vexed because you're using it to go after this man, whatever. So the law as it stands, my personal view is that it's worthless. I mean, if I had one extra copy, I'd tear it up right now and throw it just so effect. So imagine I tear it up and throw it away for effect, okay? It's best I go to the criminal code. But
the criminal code doesn't protect you from everything that falls under harassment. One of the things we see many times in workplaces is when men rub up against you, and you know they're doing it in a sexual manner. You know, I think that things like that can't be covered under the criminal code, can they?
No. But if they touch you, you could say it's an assault, but I understand what you mean. It's not there. I, as an attorney at this stage, I remember recently as a year and a half doing a case with a senior attorney, and I found it rather condescending how he comes and pats me and touches me and what he has to say. And I said, but wait, this amounts to sexual harassment. You can't treat me as a colleague. And it's not that they touch you, it's how they do it and what they say. You could sense that you're putting me down, and you're looking at me as a sexual object and say, yes, yes, darling, you know, that way, but the darling no mean nothing. That's, and this is me. This is me who would be vocal. This is me who is in a work environment where the male dominance is excessive.
So do you think that perhaps it's time for the law to be reworked, for it to have clearer definitions and stiffer penalties?
It should just become a criminal offense, I believe. This nonsense where we go and inquire into your complaint before we determine that there can be some redress is crazy. It shouldn't be that we're inquiring like that. We try to test you if what you said are true. We instead of say, let there be an adversarial system, then you come with your evidence and your claims, and then you come with yours. And in a way, it's good that they say in camera because it protects you, but it also protects the person. What happens with the determination?
Confidentiality really.
The confidentiality is, yes, but the confidentiality fine for the victim. But then that person is known to be a sexual harasser. You ask, what about a registry or something? Nothing doesn't become public.
There's no record.
There's no record, you know. So he goes back to another workplace, or she goes back to another place. Because I'll tell you another true story where it was the female who was sexually harassing the male, to the point that he didn't feel that he could make a progress, and she was the supervisor, and he became sexually involved with her. And we would say like, Chawa, you score, you know. But the guy was really uncomfortable, and it reached the point where she was asking him to do things on a job that he thought was inappropriate, and he went and he resigned. He gave in his resignation, and the workplace was shocked. I mean, like, you're a great worker, why would you leave? And then he could not take it, and he told the truth. Well, you know, I've been having an affair with my supervisor. This is how it happened, and this is how it started, and this is what has been going, but I can't take it anymore. She's making my life impossible, blah, blah, blah. And then they turned around and fired the female instead of the male. But what did the workplace do? They didn't do any further proper inquiry, which was wrong, because other people may have suffered that. So it's not only the males that do it, it's females. It may be far in between, but females do it as well. And it's because we haven't, the law could help, but then let's look at, you keep saying it's cultural. We haven't in our system taught our children boundaries, our boys and our girls. Growing up, I remember the boys grab us, do anything. And when we were growing up and your breast is starting to go, the boys found it funny, like, oh, you didn't have breasts already, and touch it. That's when we were growing up. And we see it then as innocent, but it's because from then we didn't teach our kids to have boundaries. We didn't teach our girls to just slap and box for your teeth out for the other, which is what I would teach my daughter, sorry. And we didn't teach our sons to say, no, 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 you don't do that. We don't have those open conversations. It comes from the whole thing that I like coming and talk to you about, the level of abuse in our society, and we don't teach boundaries. So we need to learn to start teaching boundaries from this level, you know.
Yeah.
You can have all sorts of legislation, but if you have a different culture, it's different. And I like I have my son studying in Europe, and I like that he tells me, Mom, it's just so different. It says the way the men approach the woman and the way we date, he doesn't mean that things don't happen, you know, but the culture is just so different. It says this thing that Belizean men do to stalk women and humiliate them and send out their pictures and say, that doesn't happen there. You literally get into an agreement, I like you, and you talk, and when it doesn't work, you go separate. And there's support systems in the universities and in the society to help teach that. We don't have that. We teach entitlement to our boys.
I always am concerned when I think of young women, and I'll be specific to women because it is the majority of the cases. We know that. It does happen to men, but it's mostly women. But young women entering the workplace, and I think that there's a lot of naivety that you have, and no one trains them for it. No one has that conversation. They're all girls' school. Do they have just one session talking about being able to recognize the signs of harassment?
They tell you to pray the rosary and be a good girl.
Yeah.
They don't tell you what being a good girl is.
Or even at the tertiary level institutions as well, you know, because before they go into the workplace, they need to be equipped with what, because of our culture, they'll probably face.
But you know, the perfect opportunity in the schools is when they send them for these office practice. A lot of cases that I've known comes out of harassment when the young girls are doing office practice. I've known quite a few, and I think last year or last 2 years, one of the girls that was shamed or bullied with some videos with her and a guy, that guy met her on office practice, and that bank did nothing. That's wrong what happened there. And it's the girl that has been humiliated, and he's like, yo, the cool guy.
But let me
yet
go
they
back
released
to
all her pictures and stuff like that.
Let me go back to the video part. What's in the laws for the protection of that?
No, nothing.
So up to this day, whether consensual or not, if a video is released with your image,
that's not addressed here.
That isn't included on the harassment,
because that's what we would come under cyberbullying, and you know, the cyberbullying legislation was announced, and that was it. I haven't heard anything else. No consultations. And that's something that needs to be dealt with. So, but nothing about that, because our law is not keeping up with the technology. And it's a good thing you bring that up, because in this, when you ask me what sexual harassment, it doesn't make provision for what the technology, how it can be used.
You could get it through text messages. Someone can send you lewd images or videos.
Or do a meme of you, or even at work when you're working, can imagine a guy just videoing like, she look hot, man. What do, you know? He's not saying outright, and it's just his conduct or whatever. So there's need for more, but the conversation is starting. I don't expect to see the changes immediate, but if it happens in my lifetime, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
But we also need to stop doing bits of legislation all over the place and connect it.
Yeah.
These are all connected. This should have been connected to the criminal code. It shouldn't have been. This could have been a policy paper on the side, how you determine certain things, but the offense should have been in the criminal code, right?
Well, I think what you have brought to us this morning is while we can say we have the legislation, it is untested. And secondly, from what you've explained, it needs to be updated to include modern issues, but also the penalties are not enough for anybody to go through this, or even the process.
And you know, like the example you all are giving with the PDF situation, it should be even more stringent, and the penalties should be even more serving as a deterrence in those kind of institutions, because you imagine the level of confidence you have to give to your colleagues when you go in the military. I mean, you're having each other's back. I mean, there's certain things that are happening. Any one of the law enforcement places, and I mean, I could go on more on that topic, because it's one of the areas that I've had a lot of complaints from police and BD and Coast Guard. This is first one I'm hearing from the BDF. It doesn't mean it wasn't happening. that I officially got complaint from, it's the first one I'm hearing from the BDF. Well.
All right. Well, any closing recommendations to people
Yes.
in the workplace who feel that they have issues with sexual harassment?
Well, you know, in the US, it is mandatory for every workplace to have an annual sexual harassment conference and stuff like that. I think we could start there. It's not going to bring about penalties and so, but it's a way to get the conversation going. I know I was hired twice in Belize by hotels that have international connection, and they have to comply with the legislation in their country. So I've done sexual harassment workshops in Belize for these institutions, but it has to become mandatory now. It has to be included so that people know what it is and how to identify it. And one, and the second thing is, don't worry what law exists or whatever. You as a woman start setting your boundaries and teaching your kids boundaries. And when I say that, not only your daughter telling them what to do or not to do, telling your sons, raise better sons. Son, that is not the appropriate way to do certain things. That's not funny. Things like that. So we can't wait for the legislation always. It's how we are developing as a people and what we think we need to do to protect ourselves. And one of the best things is to set our boundaries. Certain things people can't tell me, I will deal with them immediately, you know? And that's what my final words would be.
All right. Well, we started the conversation, and we thank you for coming in and sharing your insight on the legislation that does exist.
Anytime, you know, women and children are my topic close to heart.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to go ahead now and take a break, and if you feel up for the challenge, we're going to be talking about the first national Spanish spelling bee. I'm pretty sure you'd beat us on this one very easily, Audrey.
Yo sí puedo hablar español, pero no sé si lo puedo deletrear.
All right, so that's coming up after the break, so stay tuned.